I'm Bobby Malone, and I work at the Wisconsin Historical Society, where I direct the Office of School Services. And today, Corey Oberly, my co-author, and I are going to talk to you about our newest book, Wisconsin, Our State, Our Story, which is a textbook on Wisconsin history for fourth grade. And it's based on a methodology called Thinking Like a Historian. So what I'm going to do is go through the Thinking Like a Historian methodology first, and then we're going to get to the book itself and the accompanying teacher's edition and student activity guide. So the name is Wisconsin, Our State, Our Story, but as you can tell from the cover, it's our story because it's the state, but it's many kinds of people that make up our state, and it's their stories all in one book. And Thinking Like a Historian is a methodology that was created by a Teaching American History grant. And the partners in the grant were the UW-Whitewater's History Department, the Wisconsin Historical Society, and the 45 teachers in CESA 2. And the 45 teachers were K-12 teachers. And at the beginning of our 3-year grant, they were kind of encamped in teams. You know, there were elementary teachers and middle school teachers and high school teachers, and no one was really talking together. And there seemed to be what Nikki Mandel, the project director, and I felt like was they needed a common vocabulary. And so we tried to create that out of many national standards. And this Thinking Like Historian book was an outgrowth of that because Nikki was such a good grant administrator that we had some money at the end of the grant, and we were able to publish some copies of the textbook, of the Rethinking History Instruction Guide. And we used this methodology that was created really about the same time that Corey and I were writing the textbook in order to give a conceptual basis to the text. And the Thinking Like a Historian methodology grew out of this chart. And what the chart does, and we did test this through literally kindergarten through 12th grade teachers, is we created some basic questions that all historians use when they're doing the research. And the idea is also that history is a process of asking questions about the past. And so the outer bands of the chart really are the process skills, the kind of inquiry that people do. And the corners are how do we know, because of course to do historical research it all depends on what kind of evidence you're using. So what questions do we ask of the past? And they're the interrogative questions that all students by 4th grade would know, but also lots of teachers use those questions when they're guiding their students to do kinds of critical reading. And then how can we find out, and how do we evaluate the evidence? Where do you go? Where do you go, and what kinds of sources are you using? And if you have more than one source, which source is the most reliable source? Or what kind of opinion is that source referring to? And then I guess that line that's closest to the center would be what matters of all the things you're looking at, and why does it matter? So that students are able to justify what they're finding and see how it contributes to a key understanding. And then the center of the chart, the Thinking Like a Historian questions, are questions that we go through over and over in the book. In fact, each chapter is written around key questions that are based on these ideas. And they're all the methods of inquiry that historians use, even at very sophisticated levels. Cause and effect, which I guess is the most familiar. What are the causes of past events, and what were the effects? And I think maybe one of the most interesting are the unintended consequences of events. Some are intended and some are unintended. And you can see that that's directly going from the upper left to the lower right, it's connected to turning points. And the turning points are similar to cause and effect, only they're major kinds of things, like Hurricane Katrina would be one, or World War II, or the creation of the invention of the light bulb, or computers, or automobiles, things that after that nothing was the same, big turning points. And how did those past decisions or actions affect future choices? And we have the little icons there that teachers that were part of the Teaching American History grant thought of to kind of help convey and reinforce those ideas. And then change in continuity, what has changed and what has remained the same, are really key questions when you're doing family traditions would be one of those areas where change and continuity really come. When you're talking about immigration, what kinds of things people retained, or what kinds of traditions were adapted in the new country. And then that you can see that going from upper right to lower left, using the past. How does the past help us make sense of the present? So how do we use that information in guiding decisions, or how do we use events where, especially politicians do this all the time, and people misuse the past, but we do in fact use examples from the past, whether it's to make a political point in a debate, or to use it to direct policy in any kind of or decision making. And then the one at the bottom, through their eyes, is really to help students understand how people in the past saw their world and understood their lives. Not how we would judge them today, but how did they make the decisions that they made. A more sophisticated way to say that is historical perspective, but through their eyes conveys it very clearly to students. And this is the kind of operational framework that we used in creating not only the Thinking Like Historian, but the textbook. And so right away in the textbook, you'll see this on one of the pages in the first chapter, is we're explaining to students what history is, that it's not the past, as some people might think, and especially if you've ever heard that word when you're 9 or 10 years old, but it's the study of the past by someone in the present asking questions from the information that has come down to us. So it's the stories people have told us as an oral history, or in their diaries, or in their memoirs, or it's the artifacts that we find of the past. And then historians do choose those stories to tell. Corey and I looked at a lot of things, but we needed to have the evidence we wanted to tell a complete story. So each page in the textbook is a specific story based on the specific historical evidence of that place or event. And then we laid out the book in a 2-page spread, and we thought of each, as students open the book and actually look at it, that each spread is like a mini exhibit. And so the introductory pages are all the same. There's always a big map on the left, and next to it is a mini table of contents. Then we have the key words for that chapter, which are the key conceptual ideas. There are more words defined in the chapter for students, but the content carriers are all on the introductory pages. And then Thinking Like a Historian. So those same icons appear. In the first chapter, they only appear with their names because we're actually teaching that methodology in the first chapter. And at the bottom, there's always a timeline. And in this case, since we're only dealing with a concept, the timeline is actually the color coding of the chapters in the book with artifacts or photographs that are from those chapters. So if we look right away, We have how do we tell our state story? What does it mean to think like a historian? What kinds of evidence do historians use, and how do historians use evidence to write history? And then you have the kinds of keywords which probably might seem kind of sophisticated. I'm sure when I was in fourth grade, primary sources and secondary sources were not terms I was familiar with, but I feel like all of these words or document or evidence are words that empower students to think more critically about what they're looking at. And then how do we tell our state story? You've already seen this page on the left. Those are the questions that we just looked at. And on the right, we have some photographs that actually came from the Wisconsin Historical Society website. And we are asking questions as if there were no information about those pictures. Like the photograph of the state capitol, the one on the upper left, was taken in Madison in 1904. What is this photo telling us about what has happened to the Capitol? We've got some audience, so what do you think? It does look like a fire, and it looks like a fire, but you don't see flames, so that may be an inference. So what do you see? What evidence do you see in the photograph that tells you that there might be a fire? Smoke. There's a lot of smoke. So we think that the smoke is coming out of the building because there's a fire. And why are there people standing outside? Because, yes, they've been evacuated. And what time of year was this photo taken? The Wisconsin winter. And what are the clues? That's an inference, too. So what clues do you have?
The trees are bare.
The trees are bare and the ground is covered with snow, right. So you can see that you're already establishing information as a student would just by looking. You don't have to have all the answers. You can start asking questions. And that's what we're really trying to get the students to do. And we're also trying to drive them to the evidence on the page before they get into the reading of that evidence. And then we have the Thinking Like a Historian chart that I've just explained to you, all embedded in the book, right in the first chapter, so that students have it right there to refer back to if they get confused about which symbol was it that was through their eyes, which symbol was cause and effect, and what does that tell us? Then we get to I think, what gets to the heart of history. What kinds of evidence do historians use? So we're asking, what are sources? And we're giving examples, and all of the examples of sources that are included are sources that they're going to see later in the book. But we're having, we have a Civil War letter from a soldier at Camp Randall, 2 spear points that they'll see when they study early Indian culture, artifacts, letters. We have a page from Marquette's journal, and it's in French. But it's great because there's a line in the journal page that actually has the word Mississippi, which kids will be able to find, and we translate that line for them. We have a historic map of the state in 1848, a government document, which is Ma Yajong's immigration card, and a historic church, and we have a piece of a newspaper clipping of a runaway slave, Joshua Glover, whose story is also in the book. And then how do historians use that evidence to write history? So we go back now to those same photographs, and what we're doing, the artifacts and photographs from some of the evidence from the past 2 pages, and then I just wrote as many questions as I could from looking at those artifacts and thinking about what kinds of questions you could ask. So we have some audience in here, so maybe they'll even think of some other questions to ask. Are there any other things you might, just from looking at those spear points, want to know? So why were these spear points found? So we're asking, where were they found? Were they both found in the same place? Who found them? Who made them? How were they made? There are a lot of questions we can ask, and that does not mean, and we really try to tell the teachers this in the teacher's edition, that it's more important for students to ask questions than have all the answers in the textbook. The textbook is not the basis of all knowledge. It's to get students excited about the study of history and to understand that questions drive our information. And we do the same thing with some of the other documents that were in the evidence that you saw in the past couple of pages. So before I turn this part of the show over to Corey to tell you about the way the textbook is actually structured, do we have any audience questions? Anything about thinking like a historian? Okay, I'll have my co-author come up.